Good morning, everyone. Thank you. So I don't know if it feels like it's really the third day. It either probably feels like 3 weeks that we've been together or just 3 hours. But we are in the final home stretch. So congratulations. And I know that even today you'll have so many more inspiring conversations and you'll be able to learn and share and exchange ideas with so many more people. So we're just delighted to have you here. My name is Marina Kim. I'm the co-founder of Ashoka U, and I have the pleasure of just seeing all of this in action. And so it's just been an honor to see all of you embodying the community and team of teams that we couldn't have even envisioned a decade ago. It's really quite a moment. So we are here to discuss leadership in a changing world, and we have an incredible group of panelists. So to my right, we have Jill Violet. She is an Ashoka Fellow, one of the earliest in the United States, and she's the founder of an organization called Playworks, which is bringing play and recess to schools all across the United States. And in addition to play, there's new skills that are being developed in the playground. So empathy, teamwork, collaboration, leadership. So she brings a very unique perspective. We also have Bill Drayton, who probably needs no introduction, but for those of you who don't know, he is the founder and CEO of Ashoka, the original coiner of the term social entrepreneur, and in recent years has been coining more terms and more phrases, which you may have heard, like everyone a change maker and team of teams. And so, those are just some of the terms that we're increasingly seeing embodied in this community. So again, we see all of you as change makers, unlocking the potential of change makers, and you're part of Ashoka's team of teams, and we're very grateful for that. Then we have Vineet Singhal, who is a youth venturer. He is an extraordinary student social entrepreneur who's since graduated, and he's continuing to run and scale his venture. He's the founder of an organization called Care Message, and congratulations to Vineet, because he recently received $6 million to scale his venture. So. And last but not least, we have President Angel Cabrera, who is the president of George Mason University. And what's particularly an honor, in addition to President Cabrera being a wonderful leader of and bringing his own international leadership insight, and he's an author of a book on global leadership. George Mason is one of the first founding changemaker campuses along with the University of Maryland. So it only seemed fitting that in our year where we're celebrating 30 changemaker campuses, we would start our exchange with some words of wisdom from President Lowe from the University of Maryland and end the exchange with words of wisdom from President Cabrera from George Mason University, just because it marks how far we've come, but especially how far we've come together, that all of these institutions that are committing to social innovation are continuing to recommit many, many years later and many years into the future. So you have an extraordinary panel who will give you some words of wisdom and also a bit of a historical perspective on how leadership is changing, how the world is changing, and implications for what that means for you when you leave the exchange, when you go back to lead in your own institutions, and as you prepare your students to lead in the world of today and tomorrow. So thank you, and kick it over to Jill.
Thank you so much. Actually, I just want to take a sec. Marina and the Ashoka U team have done just such an extraordinary job of organizing these last couple of days and today. And I just wanted to start off by thanking you on your leadership. So good morning and welcome. It's Saturday. Hope everyone's had a playful couple of days. I'm very excited to be leading these fine gentlemen, as women should always do, in a discussion about leadership in a changing world. And so I wanted to start. The process of becoming an Ashoka Fellow is sort of notably, it's kind of arduous. It goes on and on and on. There's lots of interviews, and the way it starts, actually, after you've been nominated, is someone comes to you at your office to interview you, and they show up, and you're quite nervous, and they say, "So you were born, then what?" and you wait thinking that maybe they're being ironic, and they're not, right? So I thought this was an awesome opportunity for me to do Turnabout as fair play. So I wanted to start in this conversation by asking our panelists to each go through and describe sort of their origin story in becoming a change maker, to talk a little bit about, for each of them in turn, the who luck or the experience that helped them first discover their own leadership and change-making skills. So Bill, you want to start? Or not, but yeah.
I grew up in Manhattan, which was a huge privilege.
You're there.
Okay, I just have to get it closer. I grew up in Manhattan. That was a huge privilege. No station wagons, free bus and subway pass, 4 centuries of immigrants succeeding, and that all is a part of you and your family. So I remember, in retrospect, being frequently asked, well,
Keep going. You guys.
okay, I'll eat it. So, Manhattan, immigrants, success, energy, no station wagons. And you can tell I'm not an athlete. I'm always the crashie in team sports. I'm not a big fan of that role. And in elementary school, I couldn't imagine why I was being tortured by Latin and math and all this other stuff. I loved history and geography. New York, the whole world is there. So that, well, so what do you do? So I found another way of being powerful. So I started hand typing newspapers with carbon paper. Then I saved money and got a mimeograph machine, and that changed everything. Does anyone remember what a mimeograph machine was? The presidents remember this. You turn the handle, and anyway, so this became 10 pages and eventually 60 pages in multiple schools. It was obvious to me that I had to go and get ads and I had to work with kids in other schools. Well, that meant I wasn't always where I was supposed to be. And I didn't notice that this was a little bit unusual because I was just doing this. But when my mother died, I found this correspondence tucked away between my parents and the principal, Mr. Hubble. And it basically went like this. Parents, why is our 5th grader not in your school and not in our home? Question mark. Mr. Hubble to my parents, don't worry. This is the right thing for your son to do. And please don't show that you're anxious. Now, those were huge gifts. I am very grateful to Mr. Hubble. He allowed me to get my power without a huge fight. And that is not the norm. Over 80% of the Ashoka Fellows started something in their early teens. And I bet you probably that's the story of the people in this room. And that is so powerful. So we think the new paradigm for growing up is every child must master cognitive empathy-based ethics, and every young person, that was me, has to practice being a change maker. Empathy, teamwork, new leadership, change making is the only way you can get there. And that is so powerful. So I was given that gift. But how much of the discussion about education reform is about access to an obsolete, top-down, factory-modeled system that actually kills this sort of opportunity? Well, that is an example of why we're all here together and why the universities are so important in leading. You don't do this school by school. You have to change the framework of thinking. But it starts with Mr. Hubble.
Thanks. Vinny?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet everyone here. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Vineet Singhal, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of this organization called Care Message. But a few years ago, I was just any other kid that was struggling with a lot of personal health issues. I myself battled being morbidly obese at the age of 16. And over the course of my first 2 years in college, I actually struggled a lot with losing weight. But at the end of that 2-year period, I actually lost over 100 pounds in the process of completely reversing my condition and going from being what is termed insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome, and completely reversing that in the span of 2 years. So it was a personally very powerful transformation for me, not just physically, but also emotionally, mentally. It was a transformation of spirit. It was a transformation of what I felt was my potential, and became really interested in this idea of behavior change and this idea of personal transformation. And so much so that I decided that I wanted to devote my time and my work to helping others achieve similar transformations, because I knew the impact it had on me. And so I was a little bit dissatisfied. We're talking about education, we're talking about what's good and bad, and I was dissatisfied with my own experience, particularly because I felt that it was too stifling. It was too focused on going to class, doing assignments, but not too much about expanding what I felt was important for me to understand what I wanted to actually do. And it's kind of a subtle difference, because you can get caught up in the minutiae of details and theory, and all that stuff is very important. But for me, it just wasn't enough, and so I decided to actually leave college for a few months, and I decided to go work in a free medical clinic in Galveston, Texas, for about 6 months. And I was there right after a hurricane had completely destroyed parts of the city of Galveston, which, if some of the folks in the audience know, is a city that has about 100,000 people. And at the time, because of the hurricane, a significant portion of the city had lost livelihoods, had lost businesses that shut down. A lot of people lost their jobs and consequently lost their health insurance. And so I was there at a time when the demand for healthcare in the city, especially healthcare for people that couldn't afford it, was at an all-time high, at the point at which nearly half of the entire city could not afford basic healthcare. And I was working in one of the few organizations that was set up to provide healthcare to people that couldn't afford it. And I was there 80 hours every single week, doing everything from taking patient histories, to doing physical exams, to point-of-care testing, to presenting to the doctors that were volunteering at the clinic. And I was 19 years old at the time, so I had no business doing any of those things. And in no other scenario would I have been allowed to do anything remotely close to what I was doing. But because the clinic needed bodies, they just needed help and people to actually be there, I was able to get this amazing experience. And through this experience, I realized one critical, important thing that led to the development of Care Message. And the thing was, when I was going through my transformation, I had access to the best help in the world. I had access to my parents, who are both physicians. I had access to coaches and nutritionists and personal trainers. And I was fortunate to go to a good school that had access to a lot of resources, like people that were essentially dedicated to helping me achieve my goals. But when I went to this clinic, the patients that were going through some of these extremely difficult chronic conditions, they were battling diabetes, and they were battling hypertension and congestive heart failure and COPD and all these different and in some cases multiple different chronic conditions, taking 15, 20, in some cases 30 medications a day. And so going through challenges that I didn't even have to worrying about food, worrying about housing, worrying about domestic violence in their homes, that was impacting the way that their health was being, or was impacting their health on a regular basis. And these patients that needed the most amount of help had access to nothing. They had access to maybe 5 or 10 minutes with a busy, overworked physician, maybe once or twice a year, and that was it. There was no follow-up, there was no coaching, there was no support for these patients that were struggling with incredibly difficult chronic conditions. And that disparity to me felt extremely unfair. And it also seemed like something that's just a bad idea, because if you think about healthcare costs in this country, the most significant costs result from uncontrolled chronic disease that ultimately results in nearly a decade in lost lifespan. It results in incredible challenges when it comes to ER utilization and utilization of unnecessary and preventable utilization of healthcare services. And so, thinking about how can we support these patients that are currently not being supported using a simple technology solution. Because even if these patients had access to very minimal resources, they all had access to a cell phone. And how can we reach patients and coach them and guide them into improving the way that they manage their own conditions using a technology that every single one of these patients had access to, which was the ability to use text messaging. So that was the inspiration to start CareMessage. And since then, we have, since graduation, I have been fortunate to work on this project. We have built an organization that allows any healthcare facility, a clinic, hospital, government agency that is trying to improve the health outcomes of its patients, particularly those that are on Medicaid or patients that are uninsured, to use our technology platform to reach, better connect, engage, and ultimately improve the health outcomes of their patients.
That's great. President Cabrera?
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I guess we have a lot of work to do to try to figure out how we produce more guys like him, and not by accident, but actually intentionally. Perhaps my story is, I grew up in Madrid, in Spain, at a time where the best advice that one would get from their parents in terms of how to structure your career was, son or daughter, try to work for the government. This was not the most sort of entrepreneurially oriented culture you could grow up in. I graduated from college and I started feeling, I started computer electrical engineering, probably because it sounded like a good thing to do for someone who was good at math and science, to then find terribly constrained. I mean, every path in the Spanish system, you have to choose your track when you're 18, and you're absolutely clueless, but you're forced to choose a track. And once you choose a track, you're pretty much stuck. I mean, I could look ahead, and it was clear what kinds of jobs were going to be available for me, and what career path I was going to have. I could draw a pretty fair picture of what my life was going to be 10, 20, 30 years from then. And it's kind of sucked. So I was really obsessed, and I've always been thinking about this idea that education should open doors, not close them. And it's like, how come? I mean, I'm about to graduate from the best engineering school in the country with all these amazing grades or whatever, and I feel totally trapped. I don't feel empowered. I feel trapped. I got a Fulbright to come to the U.S. to go to grad school, and I started asking if I wanted to study something totally different, could I? And Fulbright, they looked at the rules and they said, yeah, it seems like you could. What is it you want to study? I said, how about psychology? And they said, why would you want to study psychology? I don't know. It sounds more interesting than all this stuff. And they said, sure, if you get any university that would want you, be my guest. But you've never studied psychology, no one's going to want you. Well, it turns out there was one university that did take me, and I came, and somehow it was a hugely transformative experience. And even though now I spend my days discussing what's wrong with American higher education, I can assure you this is much better than most of the alternatives outside of the United States. I discovered an amazing world. It opened my mind, it opened doors, it opened careers that I couldn't even imagine. Then I went back to Spain. And there was a group of folks who were building a new university outside of Madrid, and they said, we want you to join us. We're going to make you vice president. I have a new PhD. I've never been a professor, and I'm going to be a vice president of a university. What do you say? Of course. I'm there. I'm going to change higher education in Spain. We're going to show how things can be done differently. And a year later, I was fired. Unceremoniously fired. And which was a sort of a kind of a sobering lesson of leadership and change and realism. I never ceased to be as idealistic as I was, but I did become a lot more realistic. So in fact, looking back, I remember a mentor saying, you're never going to believe this, but one day you look back and you would be glad that you got fired. And I'm like, I want to believe you. He was right.
So over the last few days, we've been talking a lot about how the world is changing dramatically, and how, in conjunction with that, leadership is changing. So I was wondering if each of you could go through and talk a little bit about the specifics, what you see changing, and how you see leadership changing in response to it, and also in maybe a little bit of predictive analysis around where you see leadership going, and then the final cap, just to make the question more for extra bonus points on the question. If there's one sort of salient leadership skill that you value above others, you want to go first? You don't have to every time, just because you're my right.
Whatever you say.
You go.
So what is the most critical skill? I think the most critical skill is you have to understand the strategic environment. That means a sense of history, past, present, and future. And in a world that's changing faster and faster, and that's just a fact. Since 1700, the rate of change is going up exponentially, and it's now going really fast. And there's an inverse curve. The demand for repetitive work is going down. It's a mirror curve. Those are just facts. And we're now at a point that the old system is dying. A large part of the new system is already there, but we don't have words for it. So we're right at the tipping point. And anyone in any organization, citizen group, business, university, who doesn't see that change, that turning point, is leading in the wrong direction. And that's a bad idea, really bad leadership. You have to start by understanding the historic moment. And when you get to a turning point, and we're not only at the biggest turning point in human history, I believe, but we're right entering the tipping zone. And if you miss it, it's a really bad idea. Think Detroit, Darius, and the Persian Empire. If you get it, boy, is that power. And this is a room full of people who we at least intuit. We wouldn't be here if that wasn't the case. And this is an area where universities really have to lead. So I think that's the first most important skill. But then you have to lead in a really different way, because this game is completely different. It used to be was education. You give people a body of skills and a set of rules, and then they go into a workplace that's designed for them to repeat that forever. Barber, banker, doesn't make any difference. And the game was efficiency in repetition. So think assembly line law firm. Well, now every change bumps everything around it, which bumps everything around it. So change begets and accelerates change, as versus repetition reinforces repetition. Totally different game. So, whatever group you're leading, you've got to have everyone in that group looking at the part of the world that they're experiencing, seeing patterns, seeing opportunities. And then the 1,000 eyes have to come together and say, oh, there's a new opportunity to create value over here. And then you have to create a new team of teams, because it's a new role. And unlike the past, where you see something like that and then you can repeat it for decades, forget it. As the rate of change accelerates, what you've just created has to constantly be changing. So this is the change game, not the repetition game. And if you don't see that, you can't lead. And now you've got to lead in a really different way. You need everyone on your team to be a change maker, because the game is change. If you have only 12 people out of 1,000 who are structured to see the environment, you're not going to do well against someone who's got 800 out of 1,000. And this just is a really different type of leadership. It requires a different way of growing up. It means that at every stage in the life cycle, people have to be getting better at the core underlying skills. Cognitive empathy-based living, sophisticated teamwork, a very different type of leadership, and change-making, 4 learned skills. And that's what we're all here trying to do. So you got to see the new strategic environments. You got to organize differently in everyone. You, your friends, your kids, whatever organizations you're leading have to move to these new skills. That's why Ashoka's goal now is in everyone a change-maker world.
Vineet, it's unfair to ask anyone to talk historical context after Bill, so let me tweak the question for you slightly. Can you talk, you're still a new leader, right? What's most surprising for you about leadership in these first years of really burgeoning?
Thank you. I think maybe I'll go back to kind of the first day of when I officially started working on this organization full time. It was right after the 4th of July weekend in 2012. And I remember going to the office. We had a small little room that was donated to us, and it was just myself. And I had a desk, I had my computer in front of me, and I had almost this like feeling that you get when you are a writer and you're about to write your first words. You have this like open Word document, and it's completely blank. And that was the feeling that I had. And I looked at my calendar and I had nothing on the calendar. There were no calls or meetings, and it was just one of those feelings that, like, let's go. I mean, the idea was that we have to make it happen. And I think the broader point there is that I think just in terms of how I've seen leadership or read about leadership, and how I've come to experience it myself, I think the surprising thing has been that leadership traditionally has been something that's been top down. It's been something that's been handed to you. You are given ownership or you are given responsibility by someone else. Whereas the leadership that I've experienced and the leadership that I've found to be interesting and kind of a different kind of leadership is leadership that you develop and nurture yourself. Ownership that you pick up from the ground up versus something that's like manna from heaven coming down to you. And you're given that. So I think, and those are 2 different kinds of leadership, because in one case you are essentially the creator, you're the inventor that's developing the confines and the contours of that leadership. And then in another case you're obviously being given that. And that's kind of been the surprising thing for me, is that I always thought of leadership as something that was handed down to you, but I never thought that leadership or ownership in some cases could be something that you could develop yourself.
That's great. President Cabrera?
So I will have a very concrete answer, maybe hypothesis to your question, which is that what in the current context is changing leadership and is changing how we lead and do things. I will say is this thing.
Yeah.
This thing. And the new class of freshmen that we're accepting into college this year, I know this is scary. This is basic algebra, basic math. It was born in 1997. So these kids don't know a world, not just without the internet. They don't know a world without the internet in your pocket constantly. This is a new world. And it's a new world because, first of all, because it allows everybody to find their tribe. You're not stuck in your town or in your country, in your culture, or in your professional discipline. You have the tools to reach out, to find your tribe. You have the tools for self-organization. And you have the tools for scaling without needing to be a small part of a huge organization or a huge corporation. The fact that, a kid from Stanford who has an inspiration has the tools at his disposal to create an IT-based application that is changing people's health outcomes. So the fact that there are folks in Africa right now building applications and in fact creating things with technology and cell phones that we don't even know in the rich world, new ways of paying people, new ways of organizing work, new ways of interacting with others. I mean, this is a totally new world, a new world that this whole idea that everybody can be a change maker, it is true now. I'm not sure it was true even 10 years ago. It is true now because of this thing. The barrier of entry, the ability to scale solutions, the ability to find resources, to find the people who have the resources you don't have and that you need, has never been any easier. So does that change the way we lead? Absolutely does. Absolutely does. This whole, if you will, prototypical ideal of leadership, a sort of a wise person, normally a wise man, who has all the answers and who can tell everybody what needs to be happening. It's just ridiculous. It's no longer, it was never a good depiction of reality. I think now just a ludicrous depiction of reality.
President Cabrera, I want to stick with you for a moment. So I'm interested by what you're describing about being given that opportunity to go build a new educational university in Spain. So imagine that the higher education system that we have right now did not exist. You were starting with an absolute blank slate. So like no publish or perish, no tenure system. What are 2 or 3 things, how would you do it differently? And what are 2 or 3 sort of structural elements you would put in place to help universities and higher ed have a greater role in developing leadership specifically in its students?
Wow, and in a couple of minutes?
In 30 seconds.
Yes.
For that.
So a couple of things. It turns out I am the father of one of these 1997 born people. So I have now been going through that process of applying to college, which is enlightening even for a college president. I was totally clueless about what this means from the other end. I highly recommend it to the people in the first row. Go through this. So one of the questions that kids get asked when they're in that senior year is, what are you going to major in? And the answer systematically is a blank stare. Is I don't know. I have no clue. In fact, so I've tried to coach my son and I've told him, well, you love computers. You're always playing with the computers. You know more about computers than anybody else. Why don't you major in computer science? Seems so an obvious choice to me. And he says, I don't love computers. I like to use computers to do something interesting. Something interesting. So wow, that's fascinating. And because imagine that you don't major. Suppose you don't major in a discipline. You don't major in physics. You don't major in math. You don't major in computer science. Imagine that you actually go to that clinic in Galveston, Texas, and find a passion, and find something that you really, wow, I would devote, I don't know, my life, but at least a good chunk of my life to solving that problem, to cracking that problem, to making something happen in that context. You will learn whatever computer science, whatever biology, whatever math, whatever skills you would need, because you're now totally devoted to it. So this whole notion of flipping majors around from tools, from abstract tools and disciplines that somebody, an elder, has decided is good for you, that one day will help you achieve X, to in fact turning that upside down into issues, challenges, problems outside in the world that you are passionate about, that you can really devote yourself to trying to crack. I think that would be absolutely. So I've tested my son and his peers in a very small focus group, and their eyes do open up. They say, that's exactly, where can I do that? Unfortunately, the answer is, well, we're not ready for you yet. But I think that is absolutely critical. Can we change that? Can we turn that upside down? Now, of course, once you start, if you did that, which means that now you're going to create learning experiences that are much more individualized, contextualized, that are going to be more experiential, that are going to be, all of a sudden that goes totally counter how we're structured, because we are structured, as you described, as terrific sort of industrial machineries to produce as many graduates as we can with useful skills at a relatively low cost, and we do that pretty darn well. So the how do you go from A to B? That's a monumental challenge, and one that, I mean, at least what I'm hopeful for is to see so many champions of changes, maybe not exactly that one, but related to the change I've described in a room like this one.
Vineet, is there more that Stanford could have done to promote your leadership?
I think it's not necessarily about, I think, any one school necessarily, but I think the point that is maybe worth considering is the fact that they're just, and kind of, going off of what President Cabrera said, there is a limitation, or there is kind of this just general risk averseness that stems from being in college. Like the fact that there are a limited number of options available to highly talented college graduates. When I was weighing my options post-graduation, my options were go to graduate school, go work in a consulting firm, go work in finance. Those are my three options, and that's 80%, 90% of what my classmates are doing. And I think the question we should ask ourselves is why are those the only three options, right? Like why aren't we encouraging more graduates to go and pursue new ideas and pursue running organizations and starting or even joining existing social impact organizations? Why isn't that glorified as much as being in finance and being in consulting is glorified? So I think that's something that if I were to make one change, I don't know if we can change the whole system, but if I were to make one change, I think the one change would be expanding the number of options for highly talented, highly passionate, highly ambitious graduates, and redefining what it means to have a good experience post-graduation.
Phil?
Universities have a great advantage. The future is more and more important. It's coming at us faster and faster. And universities have the opportunity to focus on where society is going, and the sort of structure that both Vineet and Angel suggest point in that direction. Journalism and historically universities have been about reporting the past, preserving the past, structuring it. That's a very fundamental change. The need of the 1997 folks to be change makers, they are sensing that is the game. And so how do we, not just universities, but all the way through the life cycle, have the institution structured so that you can do the game of change? Well, every organization needs people with those skills, and the people now want to have and play in that game. The two pieces have to come together, and the universities play a really key role here. If I may just share a very moving story. Ashoka has a program focused on young people called Ashoka's Youth Venture. And the goal is for every young person to have their own dream, build their own team, and leave their school or neighborhood or other community changed for the better. So it was about 350 youth ventures from the US, lunch. A very tiny young woman comes and sits down next to me. And she introduces herself and says quickly, I'm 12, because she's sick of people thinking she's 8. Okay, so what's your venture? And she said, well, my brother is autistic, and all through school I would cry when he was mistreated. But now we fixed that. Oh, well, how did you do that? And so she said, well, we get together whenever we see a special student not being treated well, and we figure out how to intervene, And then we do, and we're very persistent. That's 90% her words, word for word. She has her PhD in the most important skills in life. She knows she's a change maker. She's never going to be afraid of anything. She's just built a team and changed her world. So I asked her, and if you were there, you would have had not 1 second's doubt of the fact that she has her power. I asked her one other question. How many student groups are there in Shirley Middle School, which is a poor rural school? Over 50. Well, if 1/10% of the middle school and high schools in this country and the world have 50 student groups, I'd be really surprised. So what happened to her is she went into that school, and it was an everyone a change maker world. And so people said to her, the other kids, everyone said, you had a problem, well, think of a solution and build a team. Look around, that's the way it's done. This was the norm, not a wild exception. The NEET is an exception. But what we think everyone needs is every middle school, every high school, every college, every workplace needs to be an everyone a change maker place, so that the people with these skills and the game that needs them come together. It needs to be coherent across all of our lives. The prophets told us, and we know, that science tells us, when you express love and respect in action, she's doing that. Benita's doing that. Angel's doing that. All of us are doing that. That's the gift in our lives. We get to do this. But most people don't. And kids today who are not being given this power are going to be marginalized because the demand for repetition jobs is just going away very fast. So we face a choice right now. Are we going to make sure that every child and young person, every student in university, every employee has the opportunity to constantly build and develop those skills so that they can have this gift, so we can have a more egalitarian society, so the problems don't keep outrunning the solutions? It's a very profound change, and I think the universities have the opportunity not only to break out of the historical orientation in silos, but break out in terms of all the 7 or 8 major constituencies. If the universities here were reaching out to the middle schools and high school and saying, this is really critical, and we have to work together because people live a coherent life, and we're going to work with you so that the high schools that feed students to whatever university is here, we're going to make sure that it is an everyone a change maker place, and you can reach out to the alumni. I mean,
I want to push back though. So, we're sitting up here at a panel, and Vineet's talking about, and I will just pick on you because you're right here. So Vineet's telling this extraordinary story, which makes him sound exceptional. And I wonder if we don't somehow make our job harder of building an everyone a change maker world, if we're always highlighting these folks. You're a rock star, right? And it's awesome. And yet, I hear the story about President Cabrera's son, and my daughter's also the 97, and also does the blank look. And so how do you convince, and she's a rock star, she's my daughter, right? But but she doesn't know she's a rock star the way that the 12-year-old girl, many people are terrified to come sit next to you. A 12-year-old girl comes and sits next to you, she's already different enough. But how do we reach everybody else? How do you really build an everyone a change maker world?
She went into a middle school that was an everyone a change maker world. She wasn't before. She doesn't come from a privileged background. Now, the elite schools, Stanford, Andover, are like this. There's a student group for every 9 students at Andover, and I don't think there are any faculty advisors. The whole culture says, of course, this is normal. We all had the benefit of that. I told you the story about how Mr. Hubble and my parents helped give me that power. This young woman, I was so moved by her presentation, I didn't ask about her, which I should have, but this is a really poor community. This is not Andover. There are 16 townships in that area that have flipped. Leominster High School, it's the same story. It's 40% Hispanic. It's not an elite high school, but they've got over 45 student groups. And her middle school now has 80 student groups. We can do that. She didn't have to struggle, but she had the advantage of walking into an everyone a change maker culture, and that's exactly the point. Are we going to have a divided society where we have so many people who don't have a clue what the game is? They've never been given the tools. Now, we know that you can take the poorest kids in the poorest neighborhoods, and in a couple of hours a month, in the early grades, they can and will grasp empathy-based ethics. And bullying rates come down and will stay down. We have these pathetically poor measures because there's room for lots of PhD students to come up with better measures of empathy in kids. What we would love to see, and here again, every university can contribute to this, here is a measure of impact. What proportion of 14-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds know they're a change maker just like this young woman? And the only way they know it is that they've got to practice it. They've got to live in a community, a series of communities. Parents have to understand that this is the new game. Once a parent understands that if their 6-year-old daughter has not mastered cognitive empathy-based living and is living that way, that daughter is going to be marginalized because she cannot, this is the first generation where this is true, she cannot be a good person accepted in society by diligently following the rules. As that rate of change curve goes up, the rules cover less and less. And she's not going to live in one workplace and one family and one religious house and maybe one or two other contexts. She's living in a kaleidoscope of interconnected, complicated contexts. If she doesn't have this skill, she's going to hurt people and disrupt groups, and she's gone. And prejudice against, it's her fault, and her parents' fault, and her group's fault. And you can see prejudice going up right now. And then you've got to go on. This is, the human life cycle. Young children have to do this, and then every young person needs the experience of this young woman. And she didn't have any trouble mastering it. That the problem isn't her, the problem is our leadership.
President Cabrera?
I think your question is spot on. I mean, this notion that should we define our goal as educating rock stars? And in fact, when you look at our the mission statements of many of our universities, we all have pretty grand terms about producing leaders. It sounds like we all want to train people for world dominance. We are where we train, and we're very proud that we train teachers and nurses and police officers and software engineers and all sorts of things. And so we need a language that applies to all of the above. We have, in fact, probably our biggest platform for experimentation in this area at Mason is our New Century College, and our dean is here. And we use the New Century College to do some of the things we're talking about, to do things that are more multidisciplinary and more experiential and so forth. But at the end, we're still producing teachers and nurses and police officers. Some of them create NGOs and businesses, and some of them we're very proud of. Those, we use their photos in our brochures and are very proud of them. But we're very proud of everybody. So somehow we need a narrative, and I think the sort of what Ashoka has done by introducing the term of change making and the change maker, I think it's great. That does give us a language that applies to all of the above. So American liberal education, if you ask anybody what are the outcomes of a good higher education, normally people talk about analytical skills and critical thinking. Everybody talks about that. people may describe what the goals of liberal education are differently, but there's normally you're going to have some flavor of critical thinking and analytical skills. There is normally no reference to the skill of getting stuff done, of driving change. There's no one introduces any line in their description of the outcomes, the learning outcomes that has to do with getting stuff done, driving change. So that's what, can we redefine what a good liberal education does by incorporating this notion of change making? That does not imply that everybody is going to become a rock star and the leader of the next Google or Facebook or what have you. But that everybody's going to walk out with the skills to understand how to make a dent around them in their own sort of parcel of activity.
Yeah. So I'm going to have everyone go through, I'm going to start with Anit and ask them to do some final thoughts. And we're not going to take questions today, but we're going to be incredibly high tech. And all four of us will be happy. If you have a question you would like to tweet to #exchange2015, my kids would say, "Mom is such a poser," like to say that, especially now. But if you have a question you want to tweet to #exchange2015, we will respond to those questions on Twitter. So with 100 and however many characters that is, really deep, insightful answers to your questions. But let me go through if you want to start with a response, and then we'll go to Professor Cabrera, and we'll let Bill, because it's home turf, he can wrap us up. But final thoughts.
Absolutely. So, really appreciate again the opportunity to be here. Really appreciate all the kind words about me and about Care Message. But let me be clear. I'm just a normal person. I think that the things that that have kind of led to this point today, I think have had to do with two things that I think are really important. The first one is the fact that I have had amazing role models. I mean, individuals like Jill, who are incredible social entrepreneurs. Others that have run organizations like Kiva and One Acre Fund, like organizations like that. That there has been this sort of trajectory that one can imagine for their idea. That if we're thinking about world-changing impact, we're thinking about Playworks, we're thinking about Kiva, and having that mindset is really important. But I think the second thing that's also really important is having the resources and having the guidance and having the coaching and having the people that are behind you to actually help you succeed. I think that that's something that I have benefited from, having advisors and board members and people that have invested resources, including financial resources, into the idea. And that can be really hard. That can be really challenging. I think it took me over 200 meetings and 9 months to get our first check. It was really, really tough. But to have those people ultimately that can be behind the vision and can ultimately help and guide you is something that all of us should be inculcating and developing at our universities, at our schools, and even beyond that for young alumni that are trying to do things like this. So that would be. Thank you.
President Cabrera, final thoughts?
Well, my closing comments are of encouragement and appreciation. Clearly, this room is full of people who are changing things, who are trying experiments, who are trying new approaches, who are taking risks, sometimes personal risks, sometimes career risks. Hopefully not as dramatic as my first brilliant quest into changing the world. But it is important that in the work that Ashoka U is doing in building community and creating communities where these conversations take place, where we can support one another, where best practices can be shared, but honestly, where a sense of community can be created is essential. I'll tell you, some of the very first Ashoka fellows I ever met years ago, when I first learned about even the concept of social entrepreneur. When I met some of the fellows, interestingly, the way they express their stories about, wow, this is an incredible opportunity you've had. Normally, the way they describe the biggest value they had by being an Ashoka fellow, normally what they said was, for the first time in my life, now I feel like I have some label that describes what I do, so I can tell other people I'm a social entrepreneur, right? And number two is I'm surrounded by people like me. So I'm no longer just the misfit toy. I'm surrounded by others that are helping me, encouraging me, and pushing me. Well, I think in a way that's what this community represents and what it should do. I mean, in a way that folks who are driving a new form of understanding higher education that in ways sort of geared towards empowering people to find innovative solutions to drive real impact socially, that they continue to support one another, to provide a platform where those ideas flow. I think it's is essential. So thank you and congrats for what you guys are doing.
Bring us home, Bill.
Again, totally, couldn't agree more with Angel. We're very grateful for everyone here. Being ahead of the curve is always a bit difficult, but boy, is it rewarding, and we need one another. So again, understanding the underlying history, that is so powerful. You think about impact, there's direct service. You do need the teacher in the classroom. You do need the person digging the well. But you also need the entrepreneurs bringing pattern change, and mindset change is a third level. And our opportunity right now at this historic moment is to help everyone see this is the new game. It's a much better game. And here's what it means for you as a parent, as a teacher or researcher, the head of any institution or member of any institution, how you deal with your friends. This is, once you see the new game, the game is change, not repetition. You have to organize it open to anywhere in the world. Listen to Angel again. Fluid. There can't be walls, because every time you see a new opportunity, you've got to get together the best team. That little machine he had in his hand from anywhere in the world. Across all the disciplines and organization, you need the best team for this new opportunity. And then you have to be able to do that, as he said again. Once you see that and you see the skills and you understand that this all comes together for a dramatically better life for every person and for society, and that the people in this room intuit that, feel that, but how do we change our institutions? I can tell you this is not easy even inside Ashoka. This is moving so fast. It's a different way of organizing. A fluid open team of teams is not the way we were organized 5 years ago, but it has to be now. And all of us in this room are struggling with that. So the most important team of teams in many ways is all of us who are united around the goal, a common goal. We are going to get to the everyone a change maker world. We're working on it. And we are all part of that team of teams. And we'll figure it out. So thank you very much.
Just join me in thanking our panel.